Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersmen, a YouTube channel about all things Trek with a heavy focus on the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. I am your host Bill, and today we are doing a review on the Operations Division Supplement. This is one of the earliest releases in the line for Star Trek Adventures, and just like our review of the Command Division Supplement we did a little while back, it's going to be very familiar if you've watched that. This is again one of the oldest supplements to come out for the game, so it has a little bit of a different feel than we've been getting in the recent releases. So let's take a look at that. But first, this is a review, so it follows our alert system. We have yellow alerts for things that you should keep an eye on, we think are interesting. We have red alerts for the things we think are really great. And we have black alerts for the rare, the game-changing, the things that are beyond belief that really stand out. So, without further ado, let me jump into the small window. Let's get underway. We are going to start, surprisingly, at Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the introduction to the book, of course. It is going to explain what it's about, talking what is the Operations Division, briefly, of course, and how you're going to be able to incorporate it into your campaign. A lot of the early releases for Star Trek Adventures, and it's still in current releases, but it was very heavy in the early days. They have a lot of sidebars written in universe from the perspective of a character in the Star Trek universe, and this is no different here in the introduction chapter. I'm actually going to start with a yellow alert because there is a lot of really good flavor text here, and I know some people complain that there's too much flavor text in the early stuff, too much of these in-universe transmissions or captain's log, but I recommend this for a couple reasons. First of all, let me just say you're getting an in-universe writing by Professor O'Brien, Miles O'Brien. So it's nice to catch up on his opinions on things, reading him. But there's also a very intriguing open transmission on page 8. So when you get this book, I do recommend reading this introduction chapter, reading the flavor text, these sidebars here, and especially that open transmission. I think you might find it very interesting. As always, I'm not going to spoil things in these reviews. I'm going to try cover in general what's in there without giving you too much detail. I want you to actually go out, get the book, read it yourself, and experience it firsthand. So stand down, yellow alert. Again, chapter 1 is very, very simple. That's really all I have to say about that. It's very direct. So let's go into chapter 2. Chapter 2 is the Operations Division. That division, it's only one. That's the title of it. It talks about, well, basically all the various types of operations in Starfleet. So you have things like, it starts with fleet operations, which includes mission ops, science ops, tactical ops, shipyard ops, starbase ops, all those operations inside of Starfleet Command, and what that means. It's details on how to incorporate that into your game and how to use it, what it actually represents. So if you want to even run a game in that setting that's kind of command level, almost Starfleet Command setting game, here's where you're going to get your lore to build your game. It also has a section about Starfleet intelligence because, yes, that falls within the Operations Division. You'll get history of the organization. You'll get details on spy ops and how to use spy ops in your adventures, in your missions, your episodes, and putting that into play to make it a fascinating aspect of your game. You'll get the Starfleet Corps of Engineers, of course, and same thing. Their operations, their history, how to use it in play. All of this is going to follow very similar pattern chapter by chapter. It's going to give you one section and then a very similar breakdown of what is it, how to use it. So carrying on, this is something that might stand out to a lot of people, but it's getting a little overdone these days. But back when this was written, of course, it wasn't that overdone. But section 31. I should probably give that alert, but I don't think it actually deserves it. So Section 31, it's changed a lot since it appeared inside this book, but of course, Section 31 is the mysterious underground secret organization inside the Starfleet. So what is true? What is made up? What is real when it comes to Section 31 is hard to say. One thing I do like about it here, and I am going to give a yellow alert on this aspect of Section 31 in the book, it presents you with 6 truths about Section 31, which might be the real story of who they are, why they are there, but it's 6 different stories. It's a Rashomon style explanation of what this secret organization is, and I think that's clever because even now in the new series with Discovery and that, from when that's come out, it's really expanded on Section 31. It's added a lot about Section 31. We've been getting that in recent Star Trek series, so it's still evolving, it's still changing. So from what we've seen in Deep Space Nine up until now, what is true, what is false, what is the real story, who knows? This book gives you 6 possible options of what might be the truth, but again, none of them may be. Maybe even everything we've seen on TV might not be the truth. So that's one of the fun parts about Section 31, but again, it's getting a little overused. However, it's a big and popular element of Star Trek, so I'm sure a lot of players out there want this in their game. So, Section 31. Moving on. Chapter 3. Already in Chapter 3. Do you believe that? This is for Operations Division characters. These are the options for building your characters, the mechanics for playing the game as an Operations Division character. So it's going to start out with the Security School, followed by the Engineering School. So let's look at the Security School real quick. The Security School, it gives you additional rules for playing enlisted security officers, for example. It gives, and more positions too, different tactical roles that your security officer, your security player might want to be instead of your standard tactical officer, security officer. Things like squad leader, explosive ordinances expert, things like that. Things that are a little more militaristic, perhaps. So there's a lot of variety than your standard issue vanilla security officer that you typically see in Starfleet. And of course, each of these options, these specialized positions in security, will have additional mechanical benefits that fit that role that the character might take on. So that's an option there, especially if you want a more militaristic campaign. This might be really of big interest to you and your group. There's things about, what else? Oh yeah, if you want to do a strictly security campaign, maybe all your players are security officers. Maybe they're all part of Section 31. So things about how to run a strictly security-based campaign. Advice for just creating any security characters, which gives you more options for talents, for focuses. So there's a list of talents, there's a list of focuses in here specifically for security officers, and some of these have appeared elsewhere later on. And of course, BC Holmes, character creator, you can find it all in there as well. And the next part is also, I believe, in the player's guide and the game master's guide now, I believe, is sort of describing what your character is like based on their second highest attribute. So for not attribute, discipline. So of course, if you're a security character, your highest is obviously going to be security, but your second highest, what does that mean if you're a security plus command, if you're a security plus science, security plus medical? So it gives you a lot of details of what that represents about your character's past, their history, and how maybe they act and perform in the game. The second part of this chapter is the engineering school. That was the security school, and next is the engineering school. And as I mentioned earlier, that's pretty much the same thing. It's going to follow the exact same pattern. It's more options for creating engineering characters, for specializing in engineering department inside of Starfleet. It's going to have your list of talents, list of focuses, and also what your second highest discipline says about you as an engineer. So if you're an engineer medicine, what kind of engineer does that represent? So it's a lot of good information for players. This is the players chapter. This is going to give them all the detail they need for building their specialized ops character, and also giving them ideas of how to roleplay them if they want that extra information or they need that additional boost to tell them what their character is like. Point them to chapter 3. But wait, there's more. There's really more. One more thing in chapter 3. I'm giving this, wabam, a black alert. This is something everyone should have. This is something that should be available to all players, and this alone justifies buying this book. This is the Technobabble chart that's featured inside this book. Oh my god, I love this. Okay, again, Star Trek has Technobabble. Star Trek has all that wild scientific or quasi-scientific talking, and with equipment and things that we don't know exist, and it doesn't exist. It's just all made up words. It's all made up just crazy jargon. Not all the time, of course, but the characters just say it so fluidly, so effortlessly, that you believe them. You believe this is a real thing, that they have to do this. The Technobabble chart is a chart of, it has 20 entries because you roll a d20, but it has 5 different categories that you would technically roll in order, but of course you can pick and choose because it's a chart. But it goes action, descriptor, source, effect, and device. So you roll the 20-sided die up to 5 times and you get the action you are going to perform, the descriptor, the source, the effect, and the device, so that on the fly you can pull out these very Star Trek sounding Technobabble expressions and just incorporate it into your dialogue, into the play, into your explanation of what you are doing as an engineer, as a scientist, as any character in Star Trek. They all are fluent in Technobabble. And of course, sources like MajorBot on Discord will roll up Technobabble for you. There are other ways to find Technobabble, but this chart, having that right in front of you, allows you to look at a glance, and you could just pick the terms that you want and build it together without even rolling. So that's why I say this chart alone makes this worth owning. It is so good. Technobabble chart for Star Trek Adventures right here in the Operations Division. Wow. Okay. Stand down, Black Alert. And no, I'm not going to spoil what the different things are. You've heard Star Trek, you've heard Technobabble, but get the chart, roll on it, start playing around, start talking about it. Okay, I'm done. I'm done technobabbling about it. Okay, Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the chapter on advanced technology. So different categories in this chapter are engineering devices. For example, it'll have the common tools that are available to engineers, the cost to use them in opportunity, where you spend momentum to be able to get access to it on the fly, or the opposite is threat for, what was it, escalation, but you're not really going to find that with engineering tools. So you'll have the common tools, their cost, and one thing, because this is a book for players and making them more specialized, it really goes into the differences of what an engineering tricorder is compared to your standard tricorder, and what benefits it has over the standard, and also what downside it has to gain that benefit. So if you want to really specialize as an engineering character, this is a great way to get that extra little touch, that extra little detail that's going to make your character stand out. And there's detail on how to jury rig devices, which is also a very big thing in Star Trek. Next, it talks about Starship Systems, the technology that you see on your starships. For example, the artificial gravity, the inertial compensators, replicators, transporters, warp drive, all that kind of stuff. It goes into detail explaining exactly what that is. Again, this is a resource, and it's especially helpful for players who maybe aren't that familiar with Star Trek, and they want to play an engineer, they want to play someone in the operations division, so they should know this stuff. It's a great resource for them to look up and just have a very quick, handy understanding of what these pieces of technology are. And it's never a bad idea for the GM to read it, because it's just bursting with ideas that you could make an entire scenario out of. Last in here, I think it's pretty much last in chapter 4, is a section about experimental engineering. Yeah, this is the cool stuff. This is the interesting things, like the what do I have in my notes? I wrote down the M5 computer, and for example, Federation AI, and AI played a huge role in Star Trek Discovery, at least season 2, and even bleeding onwards from that. The transwarp drive, a huge thing that appears in Star Trek 3, Voyager. Lots of times it's popped up there. The phasing cloak, USS Pegasus from TNG. What else? Synaptic scanning. There's just a lot more in there. It's the experimental stuff, the rare stuff, some of the dangerous and untested technology. It could give you ideas for new technology to introduce in your game, or play around with this rare and hardly used, hardly touched technology that we've experienced throughout the Star Trek franchise. It's pretty cool stuff. So that's all in chapter 4. Moving on, chapter 5. Chapter 5 is about using the operations division. So whereas chapter 3 and chapter 4 are more player oriented, this one, chapter 5, is more GM oriented. It's how to use the division in the games. So you'll get things like security department storylines. Just like in the command division book, you have the red, gold, and blue story plot elements that you can roll up and add into your game, and what they represent, these different plot components. So red, of course, like conspiracy, first contact, political, and it'll go into a lot of detail on what that means, what each of those plot components stands for. So it's easy for you to roll one up, read the section, and think about how to incorporate that into your story. Add that element, that command element, or the blue science element, or of course, because operations, you have the gold operations focus element. So if you want to randomize the kind of detail that is popping up in your episodes, these charts, these pages will give you a lot of good detail for common hooks to put into your stories. I'm going to give a yellow alert to something over a stretch of pages, and really the whole book, to be perfectly honest with you. There are so many good sidebars and just the little side sections throughout this whole book, but a lot of them in succession stood out to me while I was reading this chapter. For example, page 69 has a section on Starfleet regulations, away team protocols. So this would really help support the role play for all players, and also the GM to really understand, maybe add that as a plot element into the game. What are the rules and regulations when you send down an away team? Page 70 had a sidebar about performing criminal investigations. So again, security games, there are going to be a lot of investigations. Constable Odo on Deep Space Nine, he did a lot of investigating of plots happening on the station. You'll find details on running criminal investigations there. Page 73 had a focus on hand-to-hand and martial arts and ways to supplement unarmed combat rules that appear in the base game, in the core rulebook. Things like Mokbara or Ambo Jutsu and so on. The different styles of martial arts and unarmed combat in Star Trek, with, of course, the rules on how to use it and how to incorporate it mechanically into the game. But aside from these pages, as I said, throughout the book, the sidebars including the Technobabble Chart, that's a sidebar. They are so good in this book, and they give a lot of extra content. I do recommend you, when you're reading through it, pay a lot of attention to those sidebars. I think you're going to find a lot of really, really useful information. Moving on. What else is in Chapter 5? Advice. This is pretty good, too, because I've heard a lot of players have complaints, and maybe not complaints, but struggle with this. I've read some complaints about this. But advice on how other bridge officers can assist I'm tripping up on my words. How they can assist tactical officers during combat, because of course tactical officers, they are focused for combat. What else can the other departments, the other characters on bridge, how can they help out in combat situations? If you're not sure, there's good advice in this book on how to incorporate every role into being part of combat. And also, as I mentioned earlier, it does all this for security, so it's immediately followed by a very, very similar section in engineering. All the kind of stuff that I mentioned before, the different styles to add in for engineer, things that pertain to engineering, like diagnostics, what each level of diagnostic means, what damage control. It goes into a lot more detail on damage control than what we got in the core rulebook. So if you want to really expand on what damage control means, especially during combat, to make it a little more dynamic and exciting for the engineering player, there's more expanded rules for damage control in this chapter. So again, it follows the same pattern, security and then engineering, and you get the same rich, detailed information to flesh out that particular aspect of the division. That is Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the NPC chapter. This is the operations personnel. This is going to give you a random set of generic archetypes for NPCs to add into the game, as well as very well-known named characters that appear throughout the series that fit within the operations division. So you'll get NPCs such as Starfleet intelligence officers. You'll get named characters such as Sloan from Section 31, who appeared in Deep Space Nine. There's a whole bunch on Sloan in here and how to use him in the game. The Starfleet Corps of Engineers, so you'll have your standard various types of engineering NPCs to use. You have including what's named, interesting. This is one, I'm not going to give it an alert, but I'm very interested to see this. One of the named NPCs in here was Admiral John Harrison. Now, if you're not familiar, the last time we saw him, he was only a captain of the Enterprise B. And we don't even have to wait until Tuesday. He's right here in Admiral form. And there's a detail on his future post the death of Captain Kirk in Star Trek Generations. So that was a nice surprise to see him pop up in there and in Admiral form. He got promoted. He got Kirk killed, and he's an Admiral now. Go figure. And of course, just a whole variety of different Starfleet personnel to add into your game. It also has details about supporting characters. You know, the supporting character option in the game where you could just roll up a character on the fly. This has some pre-made stats, pre-made types of characters. So instead of quickly having to roll it and do it right there and try to think on the spot, you could just go into the back of this book, take one of these templates and use that for the supporting character that you need. If you're in a rush, it's a really good shortcut. So nothing bad here. Then there's a lot of character stats, options for, that's right, including the Makos from Star Trek Enterprise, or just Enterprise back in the day. So it does have a wide variety from the history of Star Trek to fit into these NPCs. So there's a lot in there. So there's a lot to take from it. All right, one more chapter, and this one's weird. The last chapter, not getting an alert, that's for sure. However, chapter 7 is called Red Alert. And you might not be familiar with it, or you might. There was a miniatures game or rules for a miniature skirmish game created for Star Trek Adventures, because in the early days, Modiphius was selling miniatures packs. So you get the Starfleet pack, there's the Romulan pack, there's the Klingon pack, whatever. And they had their tiles too, so you have your Starship tiles. But they were selling a lot of miniatures in the beginning. Those are discontinued now. They're selling the STLs, from what I remember, so you could print them yourself if you have a 3D printer. But the actual making and selling of the miniatures is finished. However, in the early days when Star Trek Adventures was new, that was a big aspect of it. And they offered an kind of a side game called Red Alert, where you could play a just strictly combat miniatures skirmish. So if you were into a miniatures battles game, you could do a Star Trek version using the Star Trek Adventures miniatures. Now, here's the problem. Here's the problem I have. Okay, as I said, they stopped making the miniatures. So this isn't as useful anymore. Of course, you could use any pieces for it. You could use like the HeroClix Star Trek one. You could get the STLs and use it for your own. But also, it suggests you could use Red Alert. Let me interrupt myself too. It also has tokens as well that you could use in this game too, this Red Alert game. So you could cut them out. It has a whole set of tokens in here. Again, interesting. But the miniatures are now gone. And they have a miniatures combat thing that they suggest you could potentially use it to replace, if you want, the regular combat that's in the rulebook. You could then just run a skirmish using the miniatures. And I know some players would be interested in that, but this does not work for me at all. Because Star Trek Adventures is so heavy on the narrative and the storytelling that something like stopping the narrative to add in a miniatures game that you're measuring, you're looking for a line of sight, you're rolling the dice, you're doing this whole detailed combat mini game inside there, just will really break the flow for me. And I know there are people out there that would like it, that they prefer that style, and this is for you. Personally, I'm not a fan, and honestly, for me, especially now at this point in the game when the miniatures are discontinued and Red Alert really isn't growing beyond what it was in these early days, this to me is a waste of the end of the Operations Division book. There's a lot more that you could fit in, and I know they're always talking about, like Jim Johnson's always mentioning that real estate in the books are at a premium. Like the real estate for pages is pretty hard. He has to cut so much content to fit in all the stuff they have. But way back then, they were giving this option, and fair to them, fair play to them. I'm not bashing Modiphius for that, because they were providing a lot of options that you could take if you were interested, and this was one of them, and it was pretty clever. It's pretty creative for that. But where the game is today, this definitely does not work. It definitely doesn't work for me. And looking back on it, all these pages devoted to Red Alert, and it's very detailed rules too. So if you want to know how to play, I mean, this is a great rule book for it. It's wasted. We lost a lot more detail that could have been used for fleshing out engineering department, security department, and just operations as a whole. So to me, at this point in history, this is a big strike against this book. However, everything that came before it is still fully possible to be used in Star Trek Adventures, especially that Technobabble chart. Everything before it is pure gold. Gold. So it's not that the book is now useless because of it. And you know what? You might want to just play a skirmish. You might just want to have a fun mini game. Go ahead. You have the rules in here. But for me, as a role player, somebody who's not interested in miniatures combat, this is a useless part of the book for me. So to me, it's a miss. You will have your own opinions on it, so your mileage may vary. So that's just my opinion on it. However, had to express it. So that is the divisions, or the divisions. No, it's not. I'm lying to you. That is the operations division supplement. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode, or watching if you so choose. So I just want to say we have one more division left, the sciences division. That's another interesting one, so I will get to that as soon as I can. A lot more things coming up, but if you have any comments, if you have your own opinions on Red Alert, if you've run Red Alert, I of course have not. If you run it, I would love to hear what your experiences were, especially if you used it in lieu of the in-game combat. You actually broke the game, added in Red Alert, and then continued afterwards. Please get in touch with me, write a comment, tell me how that went. I would be interested to hear it, because I can only give my opinion that I don't like using that kind of stuff. So I would love to hear from somebody who does like using that stuff, and I think the viewers on this page would benefit from hearing an alternate opinion than just my own. But anyhow, thank you so much for joining me again. I'll catch you next time, and as always, stay safe out there, my friends. Live long and prosper. Peace and long life. See ya.